This is the Court Leader's Advantage, a podcast series for court professionals and by court professionals. Brought to you by thecourtleader.net and in cooperation with NACM, the National Association for Court Management. It's a sweltering Friday evening in May this year, with the temperature in Tucson, Arizona still hovering above 90 degrees. Graduates gather inside the University of Arizona Stadium for their commencement. Former Google CEO Eric Schmidt steps to the podium. He praises the coming societal transformation promised by artificial intelligence. He compares it to the arrival of the personal computer nearly 50 years ago. He is met with a chorus of boos. Schmidt is not alone. Real estate executive Gloria Caulfield is booed at the University of Central Florida after describing AI as the next industrial revolution. Music executive Scott Borchetta receives a similar reaction at Middle Tennessee State University after discussing how AI is reshaping music and business. For many Americans, especially younger workers and recent graduates, the promise of AI no longer sounds inspiring. It sounds threatening. AI threatens the environment with its enormous demand for water and electricity. It threatens public trust with misinformation and hallucinated facts. But most important to Gen Z graduates, it threatens jobs and economic security. Many tech leaders appear largely deaf to these boos. Sam Altman, head of OpenAI, continues to argue that fears about AI eliminating jobs are overblown. Jensen Huang, head of NVIDIA, insists workers will not lose jobs to AI itself, but they will lose out to workers who know how to use AI tools more effectively. Jeff Bezos predicts AI will improve productivity and living standards rather than replace workers outright. However, Americans in general, and Generation Z in particular, remain unconvinced. An April 2026 Quinnipiac University poll found that 70% of Americans believe AI will reduce jobs. Among Gen Z, the concern is even stronger. 81% believe advances in AI are likely to decrease job opportunities. These fears are fueled by real-world events. In early 2025, UPS announced plans to cut 20,000 jobs. CEO Carol Tomé pointed directly to new technologies, including AI systems. Cisco cut more than 6,000 employees while shifting its focus toward AI-driven security products. Amazon confirmed roughly 14,000 corporate layoffs while acknowledging that AI-driven efficiency played at least a partial role in reducing positions. Now, let's pivot to our courts, an institution that historically moves slowly when embracing any innovation. Why would artificial intelligence be any different? Yet courts also face chronic staffing shortages, budget pressures, and increasing demands for efficiency. It may not be long before legislatures and funding bodies start pressuring courts to adopt AI tools so as to increase productivity while dramatically reducing personnel costs. I'm Pete Kiefer, and welcome to the Court Leader's Advantage podcast series. This month, we look at what appears to be a growing pushback against artificial intelligence. How serious is this revolt? Will it last? And does it truly affect the courts at all? Here to discuss these difficult questions are T.J. Bement, Court Administrator for the 10th Judicial Administrative District in Athens, Georgia. Rick Pierce, Judicial Programs Administrator for the Administrative Office of the Courts in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. Carl Tanis, Court Administrator for the 2nd Judicial Circuit Court in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And Credell Webb, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for the 1st Judicial District of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. Thank you all for joining today's podcast episode. Generation Z seems more pessimistic about AI and employment than older generations. Are their fears well-founded? Should they feel especially vulnerable to AI-driven change? Basically, what I'm asking is, was the booing justified? TJ?
I was thinking about this question, Pete, as you asked me, and a couple of things kind of came to thought, at firsthand. Namely, that the individuals that are graduating right now, And again, sort of my personal sort of observation of the world out there, they're sort of this last end of a generation that weren't completely digital natives, or more to the point, were not fully immersed in the AI world. They went to high school when they still had to do things maybe the old-fashioned way. They had Google, they could look things up, they could maybe get some shortcuts with what they found on the internet, but they still had to do some of the work. And I think that progression carried with them through much of their college, except maybe in the last year or two, as AI sort of became kind of a thing. So I think they have some real fear of they have a skill set that is based in maybe the way that you and I, as folks that are a little further in our careers, they're based in that sort of thinking. And so getting this sort of, hey, by the way, AI is out there. And if you didn't learn enough about it in your last 4 years of college, you're out of luck. And welcome to the real world, kids. That's probably not the message that they were really looking to hear as they were about to embark in the world and have college debt and trying to think about their next career. So I think there is, that sort of fear there, but also that the speed at which AI is moving and the tools that are out there, that generation that just graduated, a week or two ago, I don't think they were getting the training in how to use AI and how to use AI properly. So, kind of all those things coming together, at least in my mind, from my perspective, I would see them being very uncomfortable. And I'll close by saying I look to my niece and nephew who are in middle school, and it's AI everything. It's we use it for this, we use it for this. I need to have this. They don't even type a text anymore. They go straight to the AI feature and ask the AI and ask their Siri or their Copilot or whatever to give them. So they're fast tracking right to the answers where we might have had to type things out and then follow it up with another prompt and then go down rabbit holes to get to the right information. So I think each couple of years of folks in school is going to be a very different experience as they move forward.
Carl?
Boy, this is such a broad topic. It's difficult to figure out what angle we should concentrate on in this discussion. I mean, so many implications. It's so fluid, just as TJ mentioned. A couple things come to my mind when we talk about the booze and those who think it's evil. And I tend to agree with a lot of them that there's a potential for evil here that has not occurred in the past. And here's what I mean by that. I think we've always had huge economic and workforce disruptions. I think of, when refrigerators rolled out in the 1910s or 1920s, all the ice delivery services went away in 5 minutes. I think of a far bigger one, like the automobile industry around the world, but in the United States in particular. I suspect if you took a stable boy in 1899 and showed him the highway network around Houston right now, it would look like another planet. And so we've always had huge disruptions. There's a lot of debate lately about environmental impacts of data centers. We've always had debates about environmental impact for industries. So I think a lot of these, it's going to be disruptive. Yeah, it's going to create huge pressure on workforce. It's going to trigger all kinds of transitions. But the difference this time, I think, is that it's got that potential, if you want to call it evil, it's got that potential for dangerous things that I don't think transitions in the past have had. I think in the past they've been sort of mechanical, like the car, but huge, profound. It changes our lives, television, radio, all those technological transitions. They can be pretty profound, but this one I think is different. I think of all that discussion lately about social credit monitoring. If you pick up trash in the park, your social credit goes up in some data center algorithm somewhere. If you scratch somebody's car in a supermarket parking lot on camera, your social credit score goes down a little. Those sorts of 1984 technological monitoring kind of things I think, are really unsettling. And we could talk a lot about the angles of AI that that are potentially dangerous. But let me make one last observation in the interest of brevity, and then maybe we can move on. The curious thing I see about AI now is this dissonance between um, the apprehensions, the fears, but everybody's demand for it. For example, we're debating a data center here in Sioux Falls, like a lot of communities around the country are debating right now. And there's fierce opposition among some citizens to data centers. And there were a series of highly contentious, really angry, fist shaking, um, profanity went back and forth, city council meetings against the data center. I'll bet you every one of those data center opponents had a cell phone in his or her pocket. And I mean, it's sort of like we had a controversy here years ago, like years ago, so I can talk about this situation with a little more comfort. There was a pipeline protest in rural South Dakota at the site of a river crossing, an oil pipeline, a petroleum pipeline. I'll bet you every one of the protesters who went to that remote location gassed up their cars and drove there. And so there's this odd dissonance between the fears and the apprehension and what it might do to us and what it might do to humanity and what it might do to the environment. And yet everybody is using it. Everybody wants it. And so that I think makes this disruption really different and really challenging.
Fortune magazine reported the results of a survey in April of this year that 29% of employees admitted to sabotaging their court's AI strategy. That includes 44% of Gen Z workers. The sabotage entailed entering proprietary information into public AI tools, using unapproved tools, and refusing to use AI on their projects. Now, some courts are very specific about approving AI tools. One panelist on a previous episode once said his court was a Copilot shop. He was only allowed to use Copilot. What risk do courts face if employees secretly use unauthorized AI tools? And can a court stop employees from using other tools? Credell?
I think there are a number of risks if the employee is secretly using these tools. And number one, I'm thinking about confidentiality. And working at a court, you're going to be looking at data that's could be very personal, could be about children. It could be about a person's safety. So I think if you're working in a courthouse and we're thinking about public trust and confidence, this is just not a good thing to do, even if you don't like artificial intelligence or you don't like your court's use of it, because now you're putting members of the public at risk. And so I think that you'd have to separate your personal feelings from what your duties and obligations are at the courthouse.
Rick?
Peter, I think we could also talk about, how courts or administrative offices are using this as maybe a matter of discipline, that if anyone, infringes upon this confidentiality agreement, that it's definitely a disciplinary step to be taken, whether it's termination or some type of suspension, those kinds of things. This has been bannered about in courts across the country. And I do think that this is something that we should continue to look at as a violation of the code of conduct policies that we all generally sign off on when we enlist as an employee of that particular organization.
I fear on this angle, it's hard to stop. The cat is out of the bag, the camel's nose is under the tent, whatever you want to call it, is because a lot of these tools are so easily accessible. I can do it on a tablet. I can do it on my phone. So it's hard to say, yeah, don't use Copilot, Claude, ChatGPT to do this thing. Or to say we're not officially using these tools. But for me, I think it really comes down to, if you're going to do it as a matter of disciplinary, it's sort of what we used to have in the days of, well, you can't use your internal internet for personal use. Well, we know everybody's checked their, their Amazon account. They've looked for a pair of shoes. They've checked their kids, schedule at school or whatever from work. Those things happen. And so we look aside on those and say that's a harmless use, right? We're not really taking up the court's bandwidth per se for a couple of quick internet searches. But we do know that there is a cost with some of these AI tools when it comes to bandwidth and other types of things. So it is monitorable. It is something that, folks on the IT end might be able to take a look at. But for me, it comes down to, I think we need to come up with our guardrails of what we're afraid of. Meaning to Credel's point of saying, okay, use your Copilot because we have that and it's a tool that's available. It comes with our Microsoft Office suite. But say, hey, everybody, we are drawing this line, at least at this point in time. Do not put any case-related information or anything of A, B, and C nature or 1, 2, 3 nature in any of these public outward-facing sort of AI tools because of confidentiality. In doing so would be a breach of your employment and could be a disciplinary matter. So I think sort of setting those guardrails is one thing. But then on the flip side, saying give staff and folks in the courts an opportunity to play in the sandbox to say, okay, well, maybe we can have our own internal AI tools. And if staff want to play around and use them, let them do that because it's in our environment and it's not going out and putting our case related information out into the real world. So there's ways to look at this, I think, that can make the box that we work in safe, or at least can put guardrails in place that says staff and court folks don't go beyond here because we're not comfortable with that. And I think that's at least where we've got to start the conversation.
And Peter, if I could just continue with what TJ is saying, that's exactly what we have done in Pennsylvania. But I want to make sure that everyone knows that at least at the AOC, that we're still in our infancy here and just starting out with this in the sense that we have put up those guardrails, we have done education and training, and we have made the AI tools available, but we've put some restrictions on it, of course. And put that out there as far as what you're able to use it for and what you're not, and what the penalties are if you do. So a lot of what TJ just covered is something that we have done, but we also have to understand that this is, and we'll talk about this a lot, I think, over the next half hour to hour, is that this is ever evolving. So you're always going to have to address the policies, because AI evolves. So all your policies are going to have to be fluid, and you're going to have to take a look at these things, every several months, maybe even sooner than that, and modifying your rules and your procedures.
What advice do you have for courts that might be struggling with how to cope with artificial intelligence? TJ?
For me, I'm going to put my good administrator hat on here and say it's a matter of governance. It is one, acknowledging that you have to have a conversation about it. It's here and it's going to be in the work that we do in some form or another. We can't just say no. We can't just say no AI. So I think from a governance perspective, we need to have conversations that talk about appropriate uses and the inverse of that, things that we shouldn't use AI for. What level of human involvement do we want? How much do we want the human to be in the loop? And I think on the front end for now, it's very much so. Conversation as well about data privacy and security. What of our data are we scared about, getting into AI and vice versa, and making sure that our data is secure. And ultimately a conversation about ethical boundaries, really talking by each unit, how a judge uses it versus how a front counter person is going to use some form or some tool is going to vary greatly. And so the ethical boundary or the ethical implications of that, I think, vary greatly as well. If somebody's going to lose their life or their property or their children or their resources or whatever because some AI is making a decision that's going to impact that's a big ethical conversation to have. If we're using AI to speed up some processing in the background, and the harm for some error is minimal, that's a different sort of ethical quandary. So I think having some governance conversations, focused on those areas is a start to that conversation.
Rick?
Thanks, Peter. I will go back to what I said at the outset, that this is really not a check the box exercise. Administrators, we love to check boxes, but this one's not one of them. You must realize this is a journey with technological advancements, especially AI, that's a continual process. It's ever developing, it's ever evolving. It's not something you can just say, okay, I established some policy or some guidelines for the use of AI, and now I don't have to do this ever again, or I don't have to do it again for a long time. No, this is something that you're going to have to constantly revisit. But I would also suggest that we immerse ourselves into learning how AI works. We've kind of started to do that, but we need to do a little bit more. We've kind of dipped our toe in the pool, but we need to jump in, particularly applying its use to reduce time to disposition, if some of the things that we talked about on this podcast already, and less so on the predictability of outcomes and judicial decisions. That's what Carl and others have said that gives us a lot of pause for concern with its use of AI. Human oversight, I think, is paramount. And so when you're moving forward, AI will advise and even check on human decision-making, but human beings should do the same for AI. After all, AI learns from humans. So I would suggest that to follow in the words of the renowned Japanese proverb, the Kaikoman Creed, which is to make haste slowly. Move with caution, in other words, but embrace the movement. We should be reticent to change. Of course, we as administrators, we generally are, but not outright resistant or rebellious to it. AI should provide some relief to the courts to hasten the speed and efficiency of justice. Some relief. Some is also going to have to be involved with just human involvement. But I also harken back to what I said earlier about Mr. Friesen and the jurists and administrators he assembled to develop his 8 purposes of courts. Time is the key variable to justice. Delay destroys justice, which in turn means time can destroy the purposes of our courts. So whenever we could use AI to ensure that time does not destroy the purposes of our courts, we should do so. It is a balancing act. We do want some, as I noted earlier, we want finality to our disputes, and we want swiftness to our disputes. But we also know that we have to mete out accurate and fair judicial decisions, particularly our judges. And so it is a balancing act there, but it is something that I like to look at from a glass half full, to say that I think we've had our moments where we've had some slip ups and, fallen back. But for the most part, in the history of our courts, we've done a really good job of balancing that act. And if anything, we can perhaps pick up the speed and the finality and the expeditiousness of our results and our timeliness of our decisions.
Carl?
In preparing for this discussion, I surfed the net and browsed YouTube. And about a year ago, NACM held a panel discussion at one of the conferences. Kevin Bowling chaired it. Fascinating discussion on AI in the courts. But one of the panelists was missing because of a airline system failure the prior day. Now, I got to keep in mind that we're talking about mechanics, programming, and not AI necessarily. But I mean, to me, that was a perfect ironic demonstration of how AI and all these applications, they do really cool things and they can do powerful, cool things, but they are certainly not perfect. And if your tire goes flat on the side of the road in the winter at 3 o'clock in the morning, AI is not going to help you. And if your plumbing breaks in the basement and floods your basement, AI is not going to help you dry out that basement. And so it's got its applications. It does cool things. It's really neat in so many ways, innovative, fascinating in so many ways, but it's got its limitations. It's got its inaccuracies. So I think we need to keep that in mind. Second, I'd just key off what Rick mentioned about how this is an ongoing, this is not a checkbox kind of thing. That's such a perfect way to put it, because I think of things like warrant sweeps following facial recognition systems. Oh boy, the court implications that sort of development raises. And so, I mean, to me, I think this is going to be a profound transition in so many ways in the years to come. And just as Rick said, it's going to be ongoing, it's going to be evolutionary, it's going to be fluid, and I think it's going to be evolutionary and fluid and profound for a long time. I think this is not like horses to cars. I think this is not like ice to refrigerators. I think this is going to be, we're going to be evolving through this development probably for generations to come. And so I think it's going to be a lot of work, a lot of discussion, a lot of time, a lot of attention, but I think it's worthwhile and necessary.
Credell?
I think we need trust and buy-in. So if I'm thinking about a court struggling to adapt the use of AI, many of the things that TJ mentioned, the governance, the appropriate use, data privacy, and the ethical standards, but also we have to stay educated on artificial intelligence. And Peter, taking it back to Generation Z earlier and all the booing that was happening at the graduations, well, they asked researchers at Gallup, and they already knew that this would happen because they ran a poll just last year. And a poll was titled Gen Z's AI Adoption Steady, but Skepticism Climbs. And in that poll, one thing that I found to be like, I would have never guessed this. When it comes to Generation Z's trust for AI at work, they trust AI 3% if a human is out of the loop. So only 3%. They trust AI 28% if a human is in the loop. And then if it's completely done by a human, so we're looking at AI is out of the loop, then they trust it at 69%. Now, I look at that and say, whoa, I would trust it if there was a human in the loop and AI working together. I think that would hold more weight. So now, taking it back to the courts, if I'm a court leader and I know that I'm going to be hiring more Generation Z, and I'm saying, hey, we have these AI processes and you can work with this and it's going to be efficient. If they already have the mindset that this is not going to be efficient, I'll just do it on my own. I don't believe you that this is going to take this 4-hour task and turn it into 2 hours, because in my mind, AI is going to make a bunch of mistakes. Well, you don't have buy-in. Even if you have that leadership buy-in, you don't have the employee buy-in. And this is where I do think that some of that training comes in so you can convince those employees and show them how it works. Another thing, I do think that when it comes to, and this is what Carl has been talking about, the different types of jobs, I think that's very important. So if you're at the front counter and you're dealing with people face to face, you have to have a certain amount of human touch. And I'm talking a little bit about efficiency. And so I'm going back to your other question, Peter. You mentioned about AI's efficiencies and how could that relate to public trust and confidence. Here's the thing. Let's take AI out of the equation. Let's say you have somebody at the counter. So I'm looking at one of Carl's examples, and they come up and they ask a question, and your clerk says, oh, that's legal advice. We don't give out legal advice. Next. When you don't have that human touch, I don't care if it's AI or a human, you may think that you're moving fast and you're going next, but now that person is going to complain to a manager. Now we're eating up more time. So what seems to be efficient in the moment may not be efficient overall. So you really have to get that buy-in and show people how this is truly efficient and get them to trust it. So courts that are struggling with adapting AI, I mean, to Rick's point, it's here to stay. We're going to have to get with the program, but I think we need to do it in a way where we're looking at all of those things TJ mentioned, as well as staying up to date and getting that buy-in and that trust. I think that's going to be really important, and especially for Generation Z, because those are the employees that are going to be coming in, and we really have to make sure we understand AI, but also the perceptions of AI.
A profound thank you to TJ, Credell, Carl, and Rick for their opinions regarding this current AI pushback and what it means for our courts. How this phenomenon plays out in the months and years to come will definitely be worth watching. We'll keep you posted. And to you dedicated court professionals joining us today, your professionalism in the face of changes in law, changes in culture, and even changes in technology are what sustains the public's reliance on our court system and our strong communities. Thank you for the work you do every day. Join us again on Tuesday, July 21st for another episode of the Court Leaders Advantage podcast series as we take on the issues shaping our courts. I'm Pete Kiefer, and thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us today. The Court Leaders Advantage is a regular podcast series on courts and court administration. Today's episode will be available on our website, on the Court Leader website, on YouTube, Facebook, iTunes, LinkedIn, and on Instagram. Did you enjoy this episode? Please share the podcast link on your social media pages. Every share helps spread the word about the vital work court administrators do to strengthen justice in our communities. Become part of the conversation. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes, email us. Our address is CLApodcast, that's all one word, at nacomnet.org. Did you hear an interesting comment by one of the panelists that you would like to review, but you don't want to search the entire episode to find it? The additional resources section of the webpage has a complete transcript of today's episode with the time markers for when each question was asked. Find the discussion question on the transcript, and next to it is the time that question was asked. You can either review the comments on the transcript or listen to the panelist's comment on the audio or video recordings. Remember, if you don't have time to watch an episode, you can always listen to the audio version. Listen in your car or on the bus on your way to or from work. You never have to miss an episode. I'm Pete Kiefer, and on behalf of our guests, the Court Leaders website, and the National Association for Court Management, thank you, and have a great day. The views, information, and opinions expressed during this episode are solely those of the host and the individual presenters. They do not necessarily represent the position of the National Association for Court Management.